When I tell you, never again did I have a fear? Never again did I have, not even 1% did I have hives that would break out. I never lost my voice again with fear. I mean, that fear was completely eradicated when he
Mm.
spoke that truth into my life.
From the Florida Parent Educators Association, home of the largest homeschool convention in America, this is the Not by the Book podcast. I'm your host, FPEA Chairman Suzanne Nunn, and together we will hear from guests who share their journey to who and where they are today. Each one of them at some point left the expected path, ripped the page out of the book that says you have to do it like this, and made their own way. I hope these conversations inspire you as much as they do me. Today I get to talk with Jannique Stewart, speaker and apologist at Life Training Institute. Jannique shares her story of how growing up in Europe had a profound impact early in life on how she interacts with others and the world around her. We talk about the importance of strong family foundations and about using your talents and gifts to impact your culture in a meaningful way. Let's listen to her story.
I love talking about my background and home. I truly had a wonderful upbringing. I am very blessed to be able to say that. But I was
Yes.
actually born and raised in Europe. I was born in Germany, in
Mm-hmm.
Wiesbaden, Deutschland. So that was now being in the United States, it just seems so foreign for so many people because we were there. Goodness, I did not come to the United States until I guess my freshman, sophomore year in high school, around there.
Is that when you moved here?
Yes, that's when we moved to the United States.
So
Yes.
what was it like growing up there in
It
Germany?
it was wonderful. Well, let me first say, growing up in Europe, the one thing that you learn is you get to know people by communicating with them, having conversations. You don't make assumptions about them. Now, let me tell
Mm-hmm.
you why that is so important. Oftentimes in the United States, it seems like people are quick to jump to a conclusion based upon the color of your skin. Whereas in Europe, they just want to know, what language do you speak?
Mm-hmm.
Because, for example, most of the schools that we went to were international schools. I was always in a French speaking system. That
Okay.
means all of my classes from history to geometry, everything was in French, not English, not another language. So
Mm.
that's why when you're in an international school, people want to look in your face, they want to see a smile, they want to look in your eyes, and they want to know, how do I communicate with you? What language do you speak? Which is so refreshing when you
Yeah.
counter that to where we are in this climate in the United States, where it just seems as if, and I believe that a lot of it comes from the media. The
Mm.
media focuses on the color of someone's skin and this whole gender identity rather than just looking at the individual and getting to know
Right.
them, assuming the best about them rather than assuming the worst.
That's an important point. But I think that it is refreshing for you because, I mean, I know you and have heard you speak a lot. Refreshing to hear that perspective from you because you emanate that in all that you say and do, just that you did not grow up with those assumptions all placed on you.
Oh,
So
thank
you were in international schools
Yes. Yes, in
and
international schools. And because of my parents, and this is why even the parental rights movement is so important. And just looking at the role of parents in a society that often wants to say, oh, you are your own person. Well, yes, you are an individual, but we come in community. We
mm,
emanate from our parents. That's what it
yeah.
means to actually procreate. But I think that one of the things that is so unique, especially growing up in Europe, was that my parents raised us with the fear of the Lord. My
Mm,
parents were believers, even in a very atheistic culture. My
yeah.
parents were very, very committed believers, and they raised us with the fear of the Lord, with a relationship with Christ. I mean, I remember when I came to the Lord was at 5 years old. And even though
Mm,
it seems like it's really young, we cannot underestimate how God can capture your heart at a young
Mm,
age. And
so
that is
true.
what has set me on the path that I'm on today, is because of that initial conversation with my parents, where they focused not just on having a relationship with God, Suzanne, but they
Mm.
also really spent a lot of time developing us in terms of our character, because
Oh, yeah.
character counts in a world that says it doesn't.
Yes, that is so true. And your parents, were they in Europe for business? Were you there because of a job situation?
So
Or
my
was
dad
that
actually
okay?
has European family, so European
Okay.
ancestry as well. So he actually did work for NATO as
Okay.
well as the military.
Okay. But probably some of that European ancestry carried over into the way that you were raised and the focus on being who you are and also understanding who you are. I think that having the character to carry yourself well and to understand who you are and to be confident in who you are, I think that that probably still comes from some of that heritage.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And one thing that is very unique, I would say, in the European experience is I remember, for example, growing up in Germany, we also lived in United Kingdom.
Hmm.
We lived in Brussels, Belgium. We also lived in Liechtenstein,
Mm.
France, so Monaco, just many different countries. But the one thing that I just remember, and that's why I love going back to Europe, is when you're walking down the street,
Mm.
everyone, when you're passing by, is saying, Hoya, Hoya, especially like in the Netherlands, that's hello, Hoya, Hoya.
Mm.
Everybody is looking at each other, smiling, and saying hello. And
Yeah.
I think sometimes we can get so caught up in our busy lives that we forget to say hello. We forget to connect with people. And sometimes connecting with people is as easy and as simple as
Mhm.
looking someone in the eye, just smiling and
Yeah.
saying hello. And so we always try and bring that back. Like even with my family now, my mom is a perfect example. I feel like she's never met a stranger. No matter where we are, Suzanne, she will smile, take the time to get to know someone, connect with them. But I think
That's
part of that
fantastic.
also is what it means to be a neighbor. If we're called to love our
Mm.
neighbor, part of that is, do we even care enough to even smile? Even when our day is bad, sometimes that smile, sometimes connecting with people is what they need
Yeah.
for their mental health. But sometimes that's what God will use to open doors to actually help people and to be able to
Mm.
minister to them.
That is so true. And I think, you hit on something there for their mental health. I think we live in a society in our culture today that is just very closed off in a lot of ways. Physically sometimes closed off. People who are working from home, they don't even go out to interact, that much with people in their everyday life. And social media, everything I think contributes to that feeling of isolation and people feeling like they're not connected, even though we should be more connected than ever, right?
Yes.
But I think that that's so true. And speaking that word and being the person that will look someone in the eye and genuinely say, "How are you today?" Hello, and just have those conversations. It opens doors for sure.
Absolutely.
So you were there growing up in Europe, traveling around to some beautiful parts of Europe, and you moved to the United States
Yes.
in your early high school years. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so how did that impact you? Because that would have been quite a shock of the culture.
It was definitely a culture shock. I mean, I remember when we moved to the United States, we had a perception of what you saw on television.
Okay.
So we thought it was going to be like Hollywood. And I guess, quite honestly, we didn't really know what to expect, but we thought it was going to
Mm,
be so fabulous, which there are some aspects of America that, yes, there's a reason why this is one of the greatest countries to live in, especially when you think about the opportunities that you have, because we are in a
mm,
capitalist society.
right.
But what was also very difficult, though, Suzanne, was when we lived in Europe and we would turn on the news, we didn't hear stories of, oh, this person was killed. You didn't hear a lot about violence
Mm,
because it just didn't happen. And then when we moved to the United States, my twin brother and I, were so afraid because of the news that we were, as my dad said, you guys were nocturnal creatures because we moved here in June until school started. And my
Oh,
dad was
wow.
like, they have got to get on a regular schedule. My mom said, don't worry about it because once they start school, they will not be able to stay up all night. Sure enough, we weren't. But that was probably the hardest, was the reality that, wait a minute, you
Wow.
have to lock your doors. Even if you live in a very nice, very gated community, there was just this sense of fear and anxiety because you turn on the news and there was so much violence. That was probably one of the hardest things. The second thing was the first day when we were at school, we were just again raised to look for a friendly face. And when we
Mhm.
went down to the lunchroom, we were absolutely stunned that everybody was sitting in their cliques, but it seemed like everything was racially segregated. And we're like,
Oh, wow.
what is this? We had never,
Mm.
never witnessed anything like that, Suzanne. So we thought it was very odd. We're like, what is going on here? Like, why are people sitting in groups like this? And that is when kind of our eyes were opened that I believe, now this is again my personal opinion,
Mm.
I believe that a lot of times the traditional education that most people receive in the public schools tends to heighten ethnic and racial tension to the
Mm.
point that people, even in the lunchrooms, were intentionally segregating themselves because they thought they were not going to be accepted by someone else based upon the color of their skin.
Wow.
And it was so bad, Suzanne, even though it was a predominantly white school. I do remember when I wanted to try out an audition for the dance team. It was a
Mhm.
very well recognized dance team. Part of our dance team was called the Pom Pom Squad there. And I remember how everybody really had such high regard for the dance team. They did so well, even at the ESPN competitions. We were just very good as a school. And I remember when they announced they were going to have the tryouts and the auditions, and I told my mom and my twin brother and my dad that I wanted to try out for this, and they were all excited for me. And I'm getting ready to walk down to the auditions, and there was a little group of young ladies out there who were Latina and Black, and they're like, well, where are you going? I'm like, oh, I'm going to audition. I'm going to try out for the dance team. And they're like, you know, you're not going to make it. And I go,
Mm.
what? I go, why? They're like, hello, because of the color of your skin. And I go, what? What does that have to do with anything? I'm like, no. And
Mm.
I'm telling them, like giving them my resume of my dancing, my dancing history in Europe and why I think I can make it. And they're like, no. Hello, look at the judges. They're all white. They're never going to choose someone like you. It just doesn't happen. And
Wow.
I was like, okay. So I call my dad and I'm like crying because I'm like,
Mm.
Dad, this is what he said, nope, put it out of your mind. Do not listen to that. He's like, what is our family verse? I'm like, well, Philippians 4:13. And he's like, and what does it say? That I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. He goes, well, either you believe that or you don't. He's like, so you
Mm.
go in there, you put forth your best, and that will take you where you need to go. He's like, that's what we've always said to you is you all do your best and that will take you where you need to go.
Mhm.
So I said, okay, Dad. He's like, nope, no more crying. Put your chin up. He's like,
Mhm.
pray. So he prayed over me and he's like, now you believe in number one, the preparation. Because again, success does take preparation. You've had
Yeah.
years of preparation for this, and now preparation has met opportunity. This is your opportunity to shine.
Mm. I
So
love that.
put your best out there. And there were more than 600 girls, Suzanne, because this was a very large school of over 5,000 students. So I remember there were over 650 young ladies that
Mm.
auditioned for the team, and there were only 18 spots. So
Wow.
that's when I began to get really nervous. And my last name is Stewart, so I was all the way at the very end. And they had 3 days of auditions because that's how many people were there. So on the fourth day, that Friday, when they announced over the intercom who made it, and to even my surprise, they said Jannique Stewart.
Oh,
And
wow.
I remember going down to the lunchroom later that day, and all
Mm.
those girls that told me I could not do it were shocked when they had said my name and were like, you made it, didn't you? I'm like, yes, I did. They're like, we just can't
Mm,
believe it. We can't believe it. And I said, let me just say something. I'm like, before you guys jump on me, I'm like, sometimes our stumbling blocks, sometimes the boundaries or the barriers that exist are in our mind. They're not
mm,
always external. Sometimes they're really internal. And
yeah.
that was the one thing that my dad, when we sat down to dinner the night before, had said to me was sometimes, truly, what hinders us the most, our mindsets, our fears, those
Mm,
are the challenges that we often face, Suzanne.
that's so
Sometimes,
true.
yes, there are people that are truly trying to stop you because perhaps of racism or whatever that might be. But
Mm,
oftentimes, it's much less than we perceive. Oftentimes, it actually has to do with what are our own self limitations.
right,
And that's
right.
what, I shared with those young ladies. And the following year, there was one of the young ladies she was Latina. She said to me, she's like, do you think that if I audition this year that I'll make it? And I looked at her, I said, well, tell me about your dancing. What have you done? And she explained to me, I said, yes. I said, remember what I told you last year when I made it? That it was about self limitations. So you either are going to have limiting beliefs or you're going to have beliefs that push you forward. So you have to believe in yourself.
Mm,
And sure enough, she did audition and she ended
yeah,
up making it as well. And she became such a good friend. But I use that so much when I'm speaking, especially whether it's at universities or high schools, to
mm,
remind people that we have to sometimes get out of our head and
yeah,
sometimes we have to stop listening to the naysayers because God has a plan for us. But especially when you have prepared yourself and you have done the work, there's
yeah.
no reason why you should not be successful. So don't go into situations thinking you can't do something
Mm.
when you very well might be able to. If you just believe and if you just allow your beliefs to challenge and determine your behavior.
Yeah, I love what you said where preparation meets opportunity. And I think that what you're saying is so true. Not even, I think that I know you speak to a lot of younger individuals, but I just think about, even some of the people who might be listening today that are adults who have, maybe lived into some of the years of their life or who may be questioning, can I actually homeschool my children? Questioning, will I actually be a good parent? Can I do the things? And we don't often stop and think about all that we may have had in our lives that would have prepared us to do well. I think a lot
Mhm.
of people, myself included, we sometimes end up in places we never would have thought we would end up in working and serving in those places. But I think the biggest difference is that, that sometimes we're willing to step back and not have those limitations in our minds and move forward
Mhm.
because some of those decisions in our lives could be really scary if we
Sure.
if we limit ourselves, and if we don't
Absolutely.
look at that. I mean, I love that you're talking about dancing. We didn't hit much on this, but before you moved to the United States, and you were, I know, in high school, so you were still somewhat young. But what were your interests? That you had dance was part of your interest. Were there anything else that you?
Yes. So I definitely did a lot of the dancing. And in Europe, their school system is very different. So you had to take, just like I think in the United States, they have like physical education.
Mhm.
Only the physical education there did encompass like dancing, like even ballroom dancing specifically,
Oh
but
yeah,
clean and appropriate ballroom dancing, not
right.
like Dancing with the Stars or,
Yes,
or
yes.
anything like that. So it was that. I loved that. They also did a lot of ballet
Mm,
every Thursday, which my favorite thing was natation, which in English that it's French
okay.
for swimming. So
Oh yeah.
natation, we would go all the way down, and they had this huge like Olympic size swimming pool. And of course, everybody, if you didn't know how to swim, you learned to swim, and that was like even as early as like in the third or fourth grade. But
Okay.
everybody had to go weekly to natation, which was one of my favorites. So I enjoyed that very much. But they also had just a foreign language
Mm.
program. So even though most of my classes were in French, I did get involved with other linguistics and languages, and I really enjoyed that as well. So I do
Oh,
speak like Spanish as well. I speak a little bit of Italian, of course, German and Dutch as well.
that's great. So
Yes.
you came to the United States already a lot more experienced in some of those areas than a lot of our students
Sure.
would be in the schools. Did you, in your high school years here in the United States, did you step into any kind of leadership outside of just the relationships that you would have had with people where you presented some of those bits of wisdom to your friends?
Yes, there were 2 areas that I got involved in. One was student government, and I
Okay.
remember my freshman year when I made that decision that I wanted to be involved in student government. That was actually a challenge because and actually it started in Holland
Mm,
before my freshman year. In Holland is where God used a very instrumental teacher, Monsieur Medunion, to impact my life significantly. I remember when they made announcements there at Afsent International School that you could be a part of student government. And I knew that there were some things that I wanted to get involved in. And they said, oh, you all can. Here's what you need to do. We actually have like a little campaign that you need to do. But they made it sound very attainable. And I thought this is a great opportunity. So I told my dad that I wanted to, but there was one caveat. Monsieur Medunion did not tell me that I actually had to do public speaking for it.
mm,
I actually had a severe phobia.
mm.
Suzanne, I had a severe fear of public speaking so bad that I would break out in hives
Oh, wow.
and I would literally lose my voice, like have laryngitis. Like it was really bad. And I remember Friday was the day that everyone had to give presentations and give a little speech among their class.
Mm.
And my dad, Monsieur Medunion, had contacted my dad and told him that, I don't think Jannique knows that a speech is required. And my dad said, okay, thanks, Monsieur Medunion. I'll talk to her. So my dad sits me down. I'm all excited about everything. And he's like, Jannique, he's like, there's one thing that I think we forgot to tell you. I'm like, what? He's like, you have to give a speech. I go, Dad, there's no way. I'm like, you know what happens. You know. And he's like, hold on. He's like, calm down. Monsieur Medunion said that it will be just in front of your classroom. Would that be any better? I said, no, Dad. You know that I have a fear of public speaking. You know what happens. And I mean, even right then, I'm starting to break out in hives as he's telling me
That is
this. And he's
so
like, oh no,
funny.
he looks at my mom. My mom's looking at him and he said, well, you have a decision to make. If this is what you want to do and you want to be a part of student government, there is a leadership aspect. You do have to speak. And I was like, Dad, that's not fair. So the next day, I didn't get any sleep that night. The next day, even though I had my speech written out, Monsieur Medunion said that we had to go to the front of the class.
Mhm.
Well, I spoke so quietly as I read my little speech from the paper. It was silent. I don't really think anybody heard me, but somehow everybody in my little class voted for me. Well, then
Okay.
he didn't tell me that whoever wins in that class then has to go and speak in front of 3,000 students.
Oh, my
So
goodness.
later that afternoon, I had to speak now in front of the entire school. Suzanne, again, shaking, crying, and I see all the other kids going up there, and some of them are messing up royally, and I'm starting to panic.
Mhm.
And right before I go up there, Monsieur Medunion, he looks at me and he says, Jannique, he's like, I know that you are from a Christian home. And I said, yes. He's like, listen, even though this is an international public school, he's like, I'm going to do something that I've never done with anybody else. He's like, what is your family verse? I said, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. And he said, yes. He's like, Jannique, he's like, but you don't believe that. I said, yes, I do. He goes, no, you don't. He said, why would you say that, Monsieur Medunion? I'm like, you know what happens. You see what happens. He's like, no. He's like, Jannique, you have to let your faith be bigger than your fear. And he just kept saying that. He's like, let your faith be bigger than your fear. He's like, now I'm gonna lay hands on you. He's like, I've never done this before at a school. He's like, but I'm laying hands on you and we're praying. And Suzanne, I remember I'm backstage. He
Mm.
laid his hands on me. He prayed over me. And then he said, now go out there and you speak what God has placed on your heart. And he pushed me to that microphone. And when I tell you, Suzanne, from that time on, I've had the gift of public speaking. Never anymore did I get so emotional over this, but it changed the entire trajectory of my life. When I tell you, never again did I have a
That's
fear? Never again did I have, not even 1% did I have hives that would break out. I never
mm,
lost my voice again with fear. I mean, that fear was completely eradicated when he
mm,
spoke that truth into my life. And that is when everything changed. And even though, so I went out there, I spoke, gave my speech, they voted me in as the youngest member of student council. I was the only sixth grader that was part
wow.
of the student council that was supposed to be for eighth grade and above. And I ended up getting very involved with that.
Mm,
And that is what ultimately led me to public speaking. Because when we moved to the United States in high school, again, I got involved in student government. But then there were some teachers that saw the character that my parents had instilled in me. And
mm,
they said, we think that you should be involved in the Miss National Teenager. And I'm like, what is that? And all I knew is that a couple of days later, I had 3 packets that 3 different teachers had sent in that I should be
mm.
a part of this national pageant that was part of scholarship and character. And I ended up winning for Miss
Oh,
Illinois, Miss Teen Illinois. And
that's
that is what ultimately launched my public speaking career. It
mm,
really made such a difference, but it all began with the faith of my parents, the faith of Monsieur Medugno, this only Christian teacher at this
that's
school. But it was the truth that he spoke, that we have to allow faith to conquer our
so good.
fear.
That's an incredible story. And I think no one that knows you now would believe for a moment that you had those fears and that you had, broke out in hives. You're one
Yes.
of the most well-spoken women that I've ever met. One of the
Well,
most
thank you,
well-spoken
Suzanne.
people that I've ever met,
Oh,
honestly.
thank you.
And it's incredible to hear that story, but how encouraging.
Yes.
And not only for you as the student who was young and needed that, but how often do we have opportunities to speak truth into people's lives? And maybe we hesitate, or maybe we just do it quietly instead of speaking truth over someone. What an incredible moment for you and your trajectory of your entire life. I mean, really.
It was. Glory to God. But the other thing too is I just keep thinking about like so many parents that are homeschooling.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're raising your child and you're teaching them, you don't know what plans God has for them.
No.
So one of your jobs then is to equip them with the confidence
Mm-hmm.
and the faith that if they really want to do something and God has laid that on their heart, then
Right.
I think that it is a family's responsibility, that parent's responsibility to remind them on a
Mm.
continuous basis that if God is calling you to something, He will equip you with
Yeah.
what you need to do it.
That's
And
so
if you
true.
are equipped, then you have to have that confidence to trust God that He has called you to this and for you to walk through those doors. But sometimes we don't even want to go up to that door. We're
Mm.
afraid that that door is going to be closed when God's saying, no, it's an open door. You just have to walk through it.
Yeah.
So I do think it's a perfect opportunity for parents to really instill that confidence in their child, not to compare. Because right now, Suzanne, I know you mentioned a little bit earlier about like social media.
Mhm.
Social media, one of the challenges, social media is it's an invented or a created thing,
Mhm.
but it's an inanimate object. It's how we use it for good or bad. One of the challenges when we talk about one of the mental health components is that because of comparison, a lot of people constantly look at what other people are doing and they
Mm.
feel they're inadequate.
Yeah.
And so I think that, especially as homeschool parents, it's reminding children and even sometimes within the same household, whoever that child is, that's who they are. They're not their sister. They're not their brother.
Mm.
So we
So
can't
true.
compare them and hold them to a standard that they were never meant to be.
Yeah,
They're meant to be who they are. They don't have to walk in their sisters or their brother's shoes because
exactly.
they're different individuals with a different calling on their life. So raise them to be confident in who God has called them to be,
Them to be.
not who their
Yeah.
brothers and sisters are.
So true. That is absolutely true. And let's go ahead and talk a little bit about pageant life for Jannique.
Yes.
That's another interesting story, I know, right?
Yes. Yes. Oh my goodness. That was very interesting. But I
Hmm.
would say that what I learned in the pageant world was definitely having the right mindset.
Mm,
Because oftentimes, again, I mean, a pageant, even if it is scholarship and character based, there still is an element of competition. Competition
right.
can be healthy because in life, you're always competing for something, even if it is for a job. You
Mm,
have to be the best for that job, and you have to present yourself as best as you can so they
right.
can see what you have to offer and what you ultimately bring to the table. In the world of pageantry, though, there is also a sense of identity that can be robbed. And if your identity is not fully formed, or if you have chips in your identity, and I will explain what I mean by that, you will end up falling prey. Now, in one of the pageants, I remember one of the photographers told everybody, Suzanne, that you have to starve yourself. And this was in the USA pageant system, that
Mm.
you have to starve yourself for 7 days before they would take pictures. And I remember her saying this to the
Oh
whole
my
group.
goodness.
And this is why, for any parents that are listening, to remind your children that if they know that something is wrong, even if they think they can win something in the end, do not do something that you know is wrong, that your conscience, and more
Mm.
important, that the Holy Spirit inside of you is telling you not to do. Well, I will never forget this photographer. She said that. And I remember thinking I knew it was the Holy Spirit telling me, no, that is not, do not do what she said. But Suzanne, I admit before everyone that I did want to win.
Mm.
So I made the wrong choice to do exactly what she said.
Mm.
And it set me on a course of having an eating disorder.
Oh no.
I decided to do exactly what she did. What she said, she suggested that we starve ourselves, and she said fast. And I remember she even said, even in the Bible we see fasting, but I knew the Holy
Mm.
Spirit inside me was like, that's not what you're talking about.
Mm.
But I did starve myself for those days that she suggested, and I ended up winning Miss Photogenic,
Oh
which led
my.
to a bit of modeling career. And I ended up doing a lot of modeling, but unfortunately, with that came a lot of starvation. And it
Mm.
did lead me down a path for several years where I had an eating disorder. Not only that, but sometimes when we reward bad behavior,
Mm.
you are rewarding patterns and you're creating a lifestyle within yourself that is destructive, that God did not call me to do because I knew that the Holy Spirit had already told me not to. But I
Mm.
ignored the voice of the Holy Spirit. So, for parents out there listening, remind your kids that when they hear the voice of God saying, no, don't go against it, because it will be very hard to come back from that. And Suzanne, it
Yeah.
did actually lead me to not only having anorexia, but I ended up damaging my heart severely
Mm.
and actually almost needed a heart transplant at one point because of my choices.
Wow.
And now I'm on the other side of that, where God did actually heal me and I didn't have to have that surgery. But if there's one thing that I do regret was going down that path, because
Mm.
I knew that I was being disobedient, and I never thought that that one choice, Suzanne, would lead me to becoming addicted to that lifestyle and it leading me to
Mm.
anorexia. But I think, especially when we consider where we are in this age of social media, one
Yeah.
of the age demographics that are most susceptible to having an eating disorder are girls.
Mm,
Get this, Suzanne, between the ages of 8 all the way up to 18. But think about
that's
that. Imagine
crazy.
8-year-olds, 8-year-olds
8-year-olds.
having,
Mm,
yes, eating disorders. But as I've spoken with several psychologists about this, I actually spoke at a graduation a couple of years ago, and there was a parent that was in the audience, and she's actually a psychologist, and she specifically helps girls with eating disorders. And she says, you have no idea.
mm.
She's like, I looked into your background because I heard you speak someplace else. She's like, and you're right about the eating disorders. She's like, some of her youngest patients, she said, are 8 and 9-year-old girls.
That's unbelievable. But I think it's important to stop and hear that and not just gloss over that, you think about those eating disorders, and we often think teenagers, kids that are in high school and going into college, maybe, and sometimes, especially where parents aren't as involved in all of the decisions, right? For cooking dinner and what you might be eating. But to hear that is true for 8 and 9-year-olds is unbelievable. I mean, it's sad, and it just makes my heart just like want to break for them, because it's like, where do you go from that childhood of innocence and play and all of the things that we want to develop in our young children to a place where at 8 and 9 years old, they're struggling with eating disorders? And why? We have to really stop and think about what we're teaching our children. And I believe whether
Yes.
we're home educating or educating through private or public education, honestly, whatever your choices are, as parents, we still have all of the responsibilities that we're talking about with our children,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And to give them that level of confidence in who they are, and to understand who they are as a human being that has been created in the image of God. I think to understand that it takes a lot of intentionality.
It does take intentionality. And I think that is why I'm glad to see that there is a movement of removing cell phones from kids. Because when I've spoken
Yeah.
with different psychologists and psychotherapists, one of the things they say is that, it may start at that 8 or 9 years old, but oftentimes by the time they're in high school, they have a very poor self view and self image, not just of beauty, but
Mm,
also of even what it means to be a girl. It
yeah.
is very altered through social media. And part of it is because of all these filters that people
Mm,
feel the need to use rather than being secure in who they are. People
yeah.
think they need to compete with what they're seeing on that screen, when often what they're seeing on that screen is a lie. And you've
Yeah.
bought into that fantasy, you've bought into that lie. So I think that that is the one thing I learned as I grew out of that. Even when I was Miss St. Louis, USA, I was now on the other side of having an eating disorder. And
Mm,
that was when I made the decision that, you know what, I'm not going to diet according to the pageant. And
mm,
I'm also going to make sure that is where I really developed confidence and a voice for modesty.
yeah.
If you look at the pageant world, oftentimes women are very scantily clad, even if it's a
Mm,
scholarship pageant. And I remember when they almost literally said, we are kicking you out of the pageant. You're not going to be able to compete because you refuse to wear. I refused to wear one of the sponsor. It was Venus Swimwear. I refused to wear
mm.
the swimsuit that was the state sponsor. It was
Oh,
like,
wow.
no, that is completely immodest. I'm sorry, but I cannot before God, before my family. There's no way I'm going to wear that. I know that is not who I am called to be. I have my own swimsuit. They're like, yeah, but
Mm,
it's too modest. I said, well, that might be the problem right there. Is that
yeah.
you keep telling us this is a scholarship pageant and it's about character and all these other things, but it seems to me like you're expecting us to sell sex. I'm not here to sell that.
Mm,
And I ended up going to some of the other rooms and getting all the other girls to say, no, this is not what we want to wear. So many of them didn't want to, but they didn't have a voice to speak up
yeah.
against it. And so when I got it, ended up like 27 girls out of 65 that said, no, I really don't want to wear this. And so I
Mm,
went before them and They said, fine, you know what? We're going to scrap it and we're going to let everyone wear what they want to wear. And as a result of that, it ended up changing for the following year. There was no more swimsuit. It was just a
Mm,
fitness where you could wear leggings and a top. I mean, it just completely revolutionized it. But
wow.
sometimes that's what it takes, is standing up for what you know to be right, because it can actually change
Mm, true.
leadership for them to actually say, you know what, we heard you, we respect what it is that you're saying, and we're going to listen and honor what you have said and what you feel is right.
Yeah, that's an incredible testament to speaking and using your voice to stand up. It's not, I'm sure it's not always easy to do that. We know that, but to speak into that world and to be able to have an impact and not just for yourself, but for other people who may not have the confidence to speak,
Mm,
but they may
true.
gain that confidence by seeing that you do.
Yes, and but I think I will say, glory to God, that I think that is another opportunity that I think is very unique for the homeschool movement.
Hmm.
With homeschool students, I think that a lot of them are tomorrow's leaders. They
Hmm.
are tomorrow's leaders in whatever sphere of influence that is. And
I
I think there
agree.
are so many more people that are taking their kids out of the public school system and are choosing to homeschool.
Mm,
As many now homeschool conventions I've been to, it is remarkable what the FPEA has done, and part of your leadership,
mm.
to actually have the largest homeschool movement probably in the world, I
Yeah.
would venture to think.
Yeah.
But I think that it's remarkable and very admirable that so many parents see that, you know what? The answer isn't keeping them in public school where now they're being indoctrinated to be followers. I
Hmm.
feel that the homeschool movement is often about raising their children to be leaders among
Yeah.
their
I
generation.
agree.
And the reason that I think that God allowed me to go through that situation with the pageant is because he knew later on, years later, I was going to have to use my voice to stand up for myself in the conservative movement.
Mm,
And as a speaker, I travel all across the country. And you probably remember in 2019, I was actually invited to speak at Cornell University.
hmm.
And I remember how they reached out to our organization, the Life Training Institute, and said, hey, can we have Jannique come and speak to our student union, and specifically to, it was their Cornell's political union, their student
Mm,
political union. Can you please have her come and speak about abortion? And then they were going to vote on it. And so I told the young lady who was my contact, I said, well, first make sure that you get the date approved and then get the topic approved. Well, she calls me back not even a week later and said, Jannique, everything is set. We have the date approved. We have the subject approved, which is abortion. So she's
hmm.
like, no problem. We'll be going forward. And she's like, I even signed a little contract with what they would be paying me, etc.
Mm,
Well, about a week later, Suzanne, everything changed. She calls me back and says, Jannique, she's like, we've run into a problem. I go, well, what's that? I'm like, you already have the date approved. And most importantly, you got the topic approved. And you even said that you had me approved as a speaker. She's like, yeah, well,
mhm.
that's what's changed. I go, why? She's like, well, I have to formally disinvite you because they believe that your views are going to harm our students. I go, what? She's
Oh,
like, yeah.
no.
She's like, well, they think that because your view, she's like, now let me just ask you. So you really believe that marriage is supposed to be between a man and a woman? And I said, yes. She's like, and you really believe that a man cannot become a woman and a woman cannot become a man? I said, no, of course not.
Mm,
She's like, and you also believe that sex belongs in marriage? I said, yeah. She's like, well, for all of those reasons, we are disinviting you. I go,
mm,
whoa, 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 wait, stop.
mm.
I know my rights, and that is called viewpoint discrimination. And you cannot discriminate against me on the basis of my conservative views.
Mm.
She's like, well, I'll get back with you. So then she went back to the student board. And one of them, I guess it was the student board president, said, actually, she's correct. We can't discriminate against her on the basis of her views. So then she came back and said, okay, Jannique, you will still be speaking. I said, okay, great. Thank you. 3 weeks passed, Suzanne, and I get a call back from her, and she said, this time, she's like, Jannique, it's final. You cannot come. We are formally disinviting you again. I said, wait a minute, but that just happened. She goes, no, no, no. Here's why. They really believe that it would be too costly to have you on the campus because we just cannot host someone who basically their views are similar to having someone who is pro-slavery, pro-Holocaust. I go, what? I said, are you telling me that you are comparing my Christian conservative values to being pro-slavery, pro-Holocaust? She's like, yes, that's what they believe. And I go, have they seen me? Do they realize I have brown skin? And she's like, you do? I'm like, yeah, this is ridiculous. I'm like, no, you go back to them and tell them they can't do that. Well, at that point, then one of the student board presidents had said that it was going to cost $10,000, Suzanne, in security fees if they were to host me. So at that point, then it was final that I wasn't going to be speaking. And this was like in April. Well, I just made a Facebook post, not even thinking anything of it. And all of a sudden I start getting phone calls from Fox News and all these people, and it blew up. The story blew up. But I remember that night when it happened that I had this piece from God that the importance of standing up for what you know to be right. And this young lady was my initial contact. She said, listen, I'm a Christian, but don't you think you should just let this go? I said, no. And I ended up working with Liberty Counsel, and they took on my case. And glory to God, there was one of the board members that resigned in an open letter. And he said, the reason Miss Stewart was disinvited has nothing to do with security fees. That was a lie that our student board president made up. Nobody ever brought up money, ever. The reason Miss Stewart was disinvited is because of her Christian conservative views. And what came out of all of that, Suzanne, was even though it was at the end of the semester, there was nothing they could do. All of the students that were part of that student board all resigned. And moving forward, Cornell said, we will never disinvite another speaker on the basis of her views.
Yeah.
But that really taught me, though, and this is what I want parents to know, is listen, you're raising your children to be leaders among their generation, and you're raising them in truth. Please remind them, instill in them the confidence to use their voice for good, even if that means they might be disappointed, even if that means that they might be disinvited, even if that means people are trying to cancel you. People do not have the right to cancel truth. They don't have a right to cancel our voice because it might be unpopular. We're standing on the side of truth, and our truth needs to be heard.
Yeah, that is such an amazing story, such an encouraging story. And again, so important for the people. I know I have you speak to teens a lot, when you come. But it's because I feel like it's so important for them to hear from someone. I think that in our culture, sometimes, unfortunately, even in our churches, even in our homeschool communities and groups that we're in, I think that people are still afraid to speak truth. Don't put yourself in an awkward position. Just let it go. Or don't cause problems with your brother. Let's live in peace. And I think that those things are so destructive, those comments. And usually they're coming from just a place of maybe a lack of confidence, a little bit of fear that the parent has. But I believe, like you, that we're raising the next generation of leaders. And you can't have leaders that are afraid. Leaders need to have that boldness and that confidence in their beliefs and in who they are to be able to stand up and speak into the culture, whether it's popular or well received or accepted or not. If you're speaking truth, that's what we have to do, is continue to speak truth.
Absolutely. I think that we're raising the Daniels of this generation. Daniels, the Calebs. We're raising Esthers. But also, like, one of the things that I'm just continually reminded of, like it was in Acts where it says, we must obey God rather than man. But I think that part of that confidence that we want to instill in the next generation is that everybody has a seat at the table. Sometimes we are quick to self-silence because it might be uncomfortable. It's
Mm,
one thing when the world tries to silence you, but
mm,
oftentimes we will silence ourselves as if, well, I don't want to hurt someone's feelings, or I know this isn't a popular view. Well, you know what? We have to get out of that mindset
mm.
and know that because we represent truth. And I always like to remind young people, we're Christ's ambassadors.
Yeah.
What is an ambassador then? An
Mm,
ambassador is that person that's on the front lines. They
yeah.
are the face of that movement, but their voice counts. It matters. And guess what? People will listen if you will rise to
Mm,
that calling. If you will
so
just
true.
have that confidence to say, you know what? I have a viewpoint and it deserves to be heard.
Yeah. So true. I know we've spent a good amount of time here and we've talked about a lot of really important things. I really want to get to this part of the conversation though,
Sure.
because you have had an amazing story, an amazing journey. But once you finished high school and once you moved on to your adult life and made
Mhm.
decisions about what you were going to do as a career and what you were going to do with public speaking, you also have had a passion for the pro-life movement, and
Mhm.
you did some amazing work there. And would you bring us kind of full circle now to what you have done and where you are working today, what you're doing today, so that the people who
Sure.
don't know you can get a little bit more of that story?
Sure. So after graduating from college, I knew that I wanted to work in the realm of public speaking, but I wasn't sure what exactly that would look like.
Hmm.
And I ended up getting a job in the pharmaceutical industry.
Hmm.
And I've always been very business minded and have always just loved corporate America and wanted to move up that corporate ladder.
Right.
But this is why it is about raising your children to seek what is God's will for them and not what they think is other people's
Mm,
design and will for them. So I did go into pharmaceuticals and I was in the pharmaceutical industry for several years and moved very quickly up the corporate ladder and relocated to Weston, Florida as a corporate trainer.
hmm.
But while I was doing that, I really felt God calling me back to ministry, specifically as a pro life speaker, because that's what I was doing all those years in the pageant realm. I was speaking about the sexualization of teens and the pro life movement and
Hmm.
being really an advocate for that. And I really felt that God was just really calling me back to that. But I kept saying, but Lord, how? I am in the corporate America. I am a corporate trainer. How in the world am I going to go back to that? Like, what does that look like? Well, the spiritual warfare and just I got so strong that I knew God was calling me to leave the industry, just quit.
Mm,
And long story short, I ended up walking away and I didn't have anything set up at all, but I just knew that I didn't no longer had peace walking in to
mm,
that door at work every day. So I
yeah.
did leave. And I remember for a good 4 months, I kept getting calls from recruiters, Suzanne, that were
Mm,
offering me so much money. And I
mm,
was like, no, I had to be obedient to what I knew God was calling me to do. And then I saw an ad and someone told me about First Care Women's Clinics down in South Florida. I remember going on this interview and looking at the place. I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm coming from corporate America where everything is super nice and this little ministry that just did not fit the image in my mind of what I expected. But
mm,
what I felt when I walked in that building was the peace of God. And I went on the interview, and I remember Bo, who was interviewing me, and Sonia, she was in charge of finances and accounting. She says, well, you're coming from pharmaceuticals, right? She's like, and I see what your salary is. She's
mm,
like, I'm sorry, but this might not be a fit because look at what her salary is starting out.
mm.
She's like, it's exactly $100,000 less than what you are used to making. And I said, yes, I understand that. She's like, are you sure? I don't mean $100. I mean, it's literally $100,000 less. I said, no, I understand, but this is what I really feel God is calling me to do. She actually had me sign something saying that I understood it was $100,000 less, but they
Wow.
offered me on the spot that job. And can I tell you, Suzanne, I never looked back. I
Mm,
had truly that peace. And that was my entry into the whole pro life movement because it was an executive. First Care Women's Clinics are just that. They are just this executive group of pregnancy women's clinics that are crisis pregnancy clinics specifically.
mm-hmm.
And they help women when they are on the front lines of an abortion. So I started out with doing two things. I would go into the schools and educate them with the sex education, talking about sexual integrity. But I also was in the community doing pro-life speeches. And
Mm,
then I was promoted to being the director of the Boca Raton pregnancy clinic. And I
mm,
did that for a couple of years. And then when the economy hit in 2008 and we kind of had all those problems financially as a nation, and we saw a lot of what happened with
yeah.
the Obama administration. It ended up that a lot of us were unemployed because they had to close so many of the pregnancy clinics. And so then
Mm,
you're at a crossroads. And I remember just praying, Lord, what is it that you want me to do? And so Bo, who was my boss, came to me and said, Jannique, listen, we really think that what you bring to the table is you're a speaker. You are a pro-life speaker. We think this is what you should be doing. So he, apart from me, unbeknownst to me, reached out to Scott Klusendorf with the Life Training Institute and said, hey, we have a young lady here. This is what she does, pro-life speaking. Would you consider interviewing her? And I
mm,
went on an interview, and the rest is history. And so that's what I've
yeah.
been doing, is traveling the country as a pro-life speaker. And I also do a lot with the gender ideology, countering, training young people to counter that gender ideology and to remember that they are fearfully and wonderfully made by God as a male or a female. And he did not
Mm,
make a mistake when he made you male. He made you male in every sense of the word. And
mm,
it literally impacts every cell within our body. But that is part of how we're fearfully and wonderfully made. And there's a calling on our life as that male or as that female to impact the world around us. And so that's
yeah.
what I speak about. And I also now do a lot with I just identity and our purpose and
Mm-hmm.
trying to raise this next generation to be confident, to find their place in this world, and to just to be that light, unapologetically to be
That's
that light.
unapologetically. I love that. Unapologetically is the perfect word to describe you. I think that that is everything that I've known about you. Just like I said, exudes confidence in who you are. You're unapologetic about your beliefs and about what you have to say. And it encourages students, it encourages people. I've had the pleasure of a lot of feedback that has come my way that, resonates those truths and the impact that you can have. And I think that if nothing else, hearing your journey to this place that you are now in your life, hearing how as parents that we have the responsibility to instill character in our children and to instill identity in our children that gives them the confidence to know who they are, and to raise them in that. I believe that, again, there's so many mixed signals that children get from their world. There's so many. For us to provide in our homes a place that is purely centered around truth and around building that character, building that confidence in who they are in Christ. All of those things that we have that responsibility, whether we homeschool, whether we have our children in public or private school, it's just part of our responsibility as parents. And, I thank you for sharing your story because I think it's so encouraging. And I think that your parents must be super honored to have you as their daughter and to
Oh,
see what you've done to impact the world around you all of these years, really, for so many years. But thank you for being here today and thank you for sharing with us.
oh, thank you
And
for having me. It's been my pleasure, and just to
yeah,
get to know you all these years. And I thank you for what you do as well.
thanks for listening to the Not by the Book podcast. from the Florida Parent Educators Association. To learn more about homeschooling in Florida or to find resources to help you on this amazing journey, visit our website at fpea.com. If you have any suggestions for future guests, contact me, Suzanne, at notbythebook@fpea.com. Thanks again for listening, and be inspired to live your life not by the book.